Hello, everybody. This is Nihar Chhaya. I'm a Fortune 50 executive coach, and this is my LinkedIn live show, The Executive Experience. And I'm so excited to welcome my dear friend and career transition expert, Susan Peppercorn. Susan, how are you today?
I am so well today, and I'm really thrilled to be here, Nihar. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely, Susan. Well, Susan and I actually had a chance to meet a couple years ago through our mutual friend, Dory Clark. Also, I've been a fan of Susan's in the sense that we're both coaches, and she works on things that are really relevant right now in particular, but I think in general, even issues that I've dealt with in the past with around career transitions and things like resilience, which we're going to talk about today. But before we get into a discussion about these topics, I do want to welcome those of you that are joining us from wherever you are. Please feel free to type into the chat box where you're coming from. I also want to see if we can get lots of questions to Susan that are on your mind. We're going to be talking a lot about, a lot of different things, but in particular, we are interested in things like how to stand out in a tight job market, which is Susan's forte, helping clients. And also, because we're dealing with such unprecedented change right now, the idea of developing resilience in yourself and your team is also, I think, of big importance for people. So please feel free to share your questions, and we'll take it from there. So Susan, let me actually share a little bit about you before we jump in.
Okay.
Susan is a career transition expert, as I mentioned. She's a career coach, and she's the author of the bestseller, Ditch Your Inner Critic at Work. Now, I think a lot of us can relate that we have an inner critic that's probably loud in our minds and in our inner voices that's kind of keeping us maybe where we are as a way of protecting us from the things we could be. But I want to definitely talk to her more about her experiences coaching people in that area. She's also a Harvard Business Review writer, a Fast Company contributor, a lot of other publications that you've heard, Business Insider, I believe, a lot of other Wall Street Journal has featured her. Susan is actually an expert in the area of helping leaders, I believe in big companies as well, developing teams. So it's not just career transition, it's also developing leadership as well within bigger companies. So Susan, let me actually ask you, tell us a little bit more about your work and kind of what got you into this field as well.
So thank you. So what got me into this field actually was being miserable in my own work.
Uh-huh.
I spent the bulk of my career in high-tech sales and marketing. I was the first and youngest female sales manager at a high-tech company. I managed the relationship with a major money center bank. And everything that I ever learned about corporate politics, I learned as the sales manager for this money center bank. And I spent 15 years in high-tech sales and marketing, and it drained everything out of me.
Mm-hmm.
And the company that I was with was acquired. And when I left, I had no idea what I wanted to do. And so I, over time, figured it out, eventually getting to coaching. But I dedicated myself specifically to career coaching so that people didn't have to bump around the way I did. Because there is a way to figure it out and to find really satisfaction in the work that you do every day. And so that I've dedicated myself to that since I found my passion.
Yeah, that's really great, Susan, because it resonates with me a lot too. I found that I got into the coaching business because I struggled a lot with my own, search for the right level of fulfillment, as well as I think outward success in the careers. And we think a lot about not just challenges in trying to find your passion and your purpose, but also there's politics that come into play. There's competition. There is that kind of balance between, do I want to find what I love to do versus do I want to find what I'm good at? And so I definitely resonate with that. Tell me a little bit about the kinds of people you work with.
So I primarily work with mid-career professionals and executives. And that was a conscious choice on my part. I have to say, I'm not very good with young people starting out. What I find is with mid-career professionals, they know themselves.
Mhm.
You know, they've had enough experience. They know what works for them and they know what doesn't. And they're at a point in their career where they're willing to take some chances, assuming that they have the conditions that are right to enable them to take some chances. And in fact, I'm finding now, between the pandemic and things that are happening in society, that people are really questioning the status quo and looking at making big changes in their career and in their lives. And it's really exciting for me to help them look at the possibilities of the changes that they can make. So that's the primary audience that I work with.
So do you find, so to your point around like this particular pandemic and challenges we're dealing with now, have you found that people are coming across a brand new, almost existential type of awareness that, wow, this is the time to make a change, and maybe I would never have done that had I not been pushed to some kind of a self-awareness in this area? But is it that kind of dramatic that you're finding people are really reevaluating what they're doing?
So so the answer is yes. And I'm not saying that that's the case in every single situation, because
Mhm.
it varies. I mean, if if your goal is to keep a roof over your head, which obviously is necessary for a lot of people, they may have to find another job, and that's fine too. But for other people, there is that existential question, and I'll just give you one example. So, one of my clients, my current clients, had been laid off after 17 or 18 years in a very senior position in public radio.
Mhm.
And he had said that in the early phases of the pandemic, he hadn't really even stopped to think about it because he was so busy doing his job. And then he got laid off, which was for him a great surprise.
Mhm.
But after the layoff, he decided that he was really going to dedicate himself to working on behalf of um, Black and brown journalists who are underrepresented in the journalism field and in public radio,
Mhm.
which is by and large um, managed by white men.
Mhm.
And so this is his cause now.
Mm.
And probably if conditions had been different, that may not have been the path that he would have chosen, but it is now his path.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
It's sometimes it sounds cliche when people say things like, if you're laid off, it's an opportunity, as opposed to a bad thing, because you never feel exposed necessarily happy as soon as you get that news, but eventually it does become an opportunity. It does become a sense for you to think about it, maybe a next chapter, a new chapter. And I can say that for myself, having been laid off several times in my life. I think I was laid off back in the 2000 dot-com crisis
Mm.
in New York City, and that was a big letdown for me because I was kind of junior in my career, and a lot of quite expensive to live there.
Yes.
And then I've been laid off also from the idea of like a restructuring, a downsizing of a
Yes.
company. And so, and it's hard not to take that personally. It's hard not to think, what could I have done differently? Is it me? Is it, and I think to your many of your clients' points too, it's like I need to get a roof over my head. I need to be safe. I need to be secure. And is this the time for me to just get the next job that's out there, or should I really try to figure out what my real passions are? And I was curious, Susan, if you can tell us a little bit about some of the professionals you work with. It's standing out in this tight job market right now. Like, what's some of the advice you share in terms of really being pragmatic about what's out there versus this idea of really doing deep work on what your strengths are, and where you might be
Mhm.
applicable to in long-term value?
All right, so it's a great question, and I really think it depends on where you are in your career and what you need. I don't want to trivialize the impact of a layoff. It is devastating. And no matter how successful someone has been, it is devastating. And there is an emotional, there's an emotional track that people experience with a layoff, and the questions that you mentioned about what could I have done differently? Could I have done something differently? Everyone experiences that, no matter how well a layoff is conducted. So I just want to say that. So I think the first thing to really evaluate is the practicalities of where you are. I mean, what do you need financially? How much runway do you have? Meaning, financially, do you have a runway? So, can you afford to take the time to do the deep dive into what are your strengths, your passions, your interests, and all of that? And sometimes the answer is yes, but sometimes the answer is not now. Sometimes that has to wait. And if it has to wait, I just want to say to anybody watching, that's okay. Because sometimes it has to wait another 5 years or another 10 years. I mean, if you're raising a young family and you have a mortgage, you need a job. And then, so what do you do if you need a job? I'll say really three things. One is you need to keep your branding up to date. What do I mean by that? You need to have your LinkedIn profile as built out and as up to date as it possibly can be. Because LinkedIn right now has become the go-to place where somebody is going to look for you before they go anywhere else. So, it's not about Facebook or Instagram or any of these other social media sites, but LinkedIn is the place where someone is going to go to look at you and assess your credibility in the job market. So that's number one. Number two is you have to leverage your network. And actually, the pandemic is a good opportunity to do that. Applying for jobs online, this is kind of counterintuitive. What I'm going to say is you would think that the best way to go about and find a new job is finding a job, posting, and applying for it. Wrong. All the statistics will show you that only 25 to 30% of job seekers get their jobs that way. Most people get their jobs or find out about opportunities through a networking connection. And this really makes sense because if you're hiring, you would much prefer to have someone referred to you than, having an anonymous resume sent over the transom where you don't know the person. So the opportunity that COVID offers is everybody is home now. So people aren't getting on planes. They're not traveling, to different continents. So people are more accessible. They're busy, but they are accessible. So if you reach out to someone and you ask them for 10 minutes of their time for their advice, the likelihood is you're going to get it because people are around. So use that opportunity. And also business networking groups that used to meet in person are still functioning. They're just functioning virtually. So you can join those networking groups and take advantage of them. So, those are two things. And make sure the third thing is make sure your resume is up to date. Because if somebody says, oh, I know of an opportunity, you have to make sure that that part of your branding is also up to date and relevant. So those are some things that I'd recommend.
Great advice, Susan. And I want to dig in a little bit deeper into, I think, the number 2 point, the networking aspect.
Yes.
I love that idea, and I would agree completely that right now to get lost in the shuffle with posting resumes it's not a great idea. And in fact, I've worked with a few of my clients who have left, voluntarily wanted to leave their company.
Mhm.
And they are, I think, like your clients, they're pretty experienced people. If they're kind of in the maybe VP or even higher level roles. And I find that it's even more challenging for them because they have a fixed view of what they can do. And they have a fixed kind of perspective of where they want to be. In many cases, they might say, hey, I know I want to be a chief marketing officer or an SVP in finance at this company or in this industry. And do you have any advice on that conundrum? I mean, is that something that is a little bit short-sighted to say, well, you should probably be open to maybe looking at that function in lots of different companies? Or would you say, try your best to really dig into the network in those companies and start building your kind of visibility across different people in that one place? Any advice on that?
Yeah, it's such a great question, and I've seen it with my own clients.
Mm-hmm.
So, it brings to mind an example of one of my clients who is a scientific leader, and he had been at a company for 19 or 20 years, and he ran a research division at this company, and they had a restructuring, and his position was eliminated. So when he started to work with me, he said something very similar to what your client said to you, Nihar, was, I want the same job that I had before in a different company. And what happened is people would say to him, as he started to network, which was really the key to this, you might want to think about other possibilities. And that's where the networking really became incredibly valuable, because for the first few weeks or months, he started to look for that very same job. And guess what? It didn't exist, or the number of opportunities were so limited that he was just making it so difficult for himself because the opportunities were too limited. So what your network can do for you is they can provide a perspective. If you say to them, you know me well, you know my strengths, where do you see me? What advice can you give me? You know the market. So you know my strengths as a marketer. What other possibilities do you see for me? And instead of saying, this is what I want, ask somebody, what advice do you have for me? Mm-hmm. Because in the case of my client, people kept saying to him, we think you should start your own company. We think you should go to a startup. And he had been with a large company. And he said, and the voices in his head were telling him, start my own company. I don't know anything about starting my own company. Right. I'm a scientist. And people were saying to him, you can find the people that know the business aspects. And, eventually that's what he did. He wound up in a company that was a startup company. But it was only because listening to his network and taking advice from his network, he started opening up to new possibilities. And so like with your client, if his network had said, or her network had said to her, you might want to look at marketing in startups. Mm-hmm. And here's why you might want to consider that. Or you might want to look at marketing in the nonprofit world. And here's why you might want to consider that. You do want to broaden your options because you never know what might come out of those conversations. And I have seen this happen with clients of mine numerous times, where when they listened to what their network was saying to them, they actually changed how they were positioning themselves, and they were then successful and much happier in what they ultimately, in the roles they ultimately ended up in.
Yeah, it's interesting because in some ways we think we know what we really want, but sometimes if we're getting validated in things that we are really good at, but never knew that people felt positively about us, we might want that too. We will go towards that as well. I'll give you an example. A lot of the people that I talk to will say, I don't want to take a pay cut, so they won't even consider those kinds of companies
Right.
until they actually find that they are seen as like a savior for that company, or like, wow, they really are given the proper respect and for their credibility. That feels great. And then they're actually like, well, I guess I'm getting what I want, I'm not like necessarily beholden to that amount of money. So I think what happens is, I think you touched on a really interesting point here, which is like opening up your mind to what other people see in you might actually trigger more of a sense of fulfillment and driving after your values than you think you are, because you might just be positioning yourself relative to what like your colleagues were doing or what they're making in terms of the market.
Right.
So I really like that idea of just being listened. And I think what you're touching on, which is really great, is not just the practical aspect of getting another job, but you're actually teaching people to be more resilient. And you're teaching people to deal with that rejection or whatever the issue that came into their career with, by actually, kind of shifting their mindset as well. Can you tell us a little bit about, like, is that kind of what you would say the nature of your coaching is? Is it both a little bit of the practical aspect as well as the general changing, helping them kind of change their mindsets and surfacing blind spots?
So, resiliency is key to success when someone is in a job search, because there's a huge amount of rejection.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it is part and parcel of looking for a new job, and there's no way around it. And so, with clients that I work with, I teach them, for example, about reframing situations.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you an example that I think a lot of people can relate to, and that has to do with following up.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say you reach out to someone for networking, okay, and you don't hear back. And I use an example in my own life, in my own situation, where I have reached out to someone and I don't hear back. And what happens? Your mind starts telling you stories. Oh, they're not interested in talking to me, right? Why did I bother reaching out to them in the first place? They don't have the time for me. And so we weave this story, and we come to the conclusion that we just shouldn't follow up with them. Well, successful salespeople will tell you that it takes 5 to 6 outreaches to engage a sales prospect.
Mm.
And what sets a successful salesperson apart from their less successful counterparts are the number of outreaches that they're willing to do.
Mm.
So oftentimes I run a networking group for executives in transition, and we'll often talk about networking and how to follow up and what's the appropriate way. And oftentimes we get into this conversation about what to do if someone doesn't respond.
Mm-hmm.
And so recently we were having this discussion. And, one of the things we were talking about is this concept of reframing. So let's say you've reached out, you don't hear back. You have to reframe this and say, maybe the person is busy. Maybe it's not about you.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they forgot. And it's happened to me. I'm sure it's happened to you.
Right.
You get an email, it goes to the second page of your email, you forget to answer.
Yeah.
And so instead of going to the negative automatically, you have to say to yourself, I'm just going to reach out again.
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking about actually a story with a situation with a client of mine who had a job put on hold right when COVID happened.
Mm.
And she was at the tail end of the interviewing cycle. And they said, we're really sorry, but all non-essential hiring is put on hold. Mm-hmm. I think she had 1 or 2 interviews left. So talk about resilience.
Yeah.
She had a decision to make. Was she just going to drop it and, let it go? And so what she decided to do, and it took a lot of guts, a lot of courage, and a lot of resilience, is she followed up approximately every 3 weeks.
Okay.
And she would send an email. First, she sent an email offering consulting services. She knew that they couldn't hire her full time. So she said, I just want to send my appreciation for the interviews that I had. I love your team. And I know you have these challenges. They haven't gone away. But I'm willing to help you out on a freelance basis. Would you consider that? And their response was, we'd love to consider that, but we're so overwhelmed that we just can't even think about it right now. We're in crisis mode. She said, I totally understand. About another 3 weeks later, so this started in, mid-March, another 3 weeks later, she sent another email. Just want to see how you guys are doing. I've been thinking about you. This is such a tough time. How are you? That was all she said. They wrote her back. Thanks, so nice of you to think of us at this time. We're hanging in there. Then she sent another follow-up. I think it was mid-June, she got an email from them, and they said to her, are you interested in completing the interviewing process?
Okay.
Things are starting to open up here. And she said, yes, I am. And around the 4th of July, she got a job offer.
Wow.
So this took a lot of courage because, she had to balance her own anxiety.
Yes.
With, how she really positioned those communications, which were 2/3 about them and just 1/3 about her, and but she did it in such a way that reminded the employer why they liked her. And had she not done that, they probably would not have come back to her, because they might have forgotten about her. Who knows?
Absolutely. And also, what I love about that story, Susan, is that first of all, she managed the inner critic, because I think, and I've been down this road too. You're thinking they must hate me. They don't want to hear from me. Right? But the second part of it is that what I really love about that example is she treated them as if she was going to work with them at some point.
Yes.
Like there's a relationship that she put first.
That's
and
right.
Didn't make it conditional on whether I'm going to get hired or not.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And I'll tell you, I said to her, I said, you must have nerves of steel. And she said to me, you know what, Susan, I'm not sleeping. I'm a nervous wreck. And, we talked about all the stress relieving, and this gets into resilience. What was she doing to take care of herself?
Yeah.
Because that's so important when it comes to resilience and teams, and what teams, what employees can be doing, because, even if you're not in a job search, everyone is stressed right now. Whether you're in the best of situations or not, everyone is feeling the stress of this pandemic. And so it's so, so critical to take care of yourself. So she and I talked a lot about what was she doing to care for herself during this transition, and making that a priority, because that's really, really critical.
Yeah, and I think also with us all working from home, it's like it's so much harder to really pick up on the cues between people, that because we're all emailing, maybe we're not in front of them personally. We can't, I think this idea of not hearing back from somebody, it's like you start conjuring up all types of scenarios.
Yeah.
And then you can become, a doomsday, like maybe we'll never talk again, if I don't hear back from them, because you don't want to be the person bothering them every week. But I think there's something in that you're teaching, which is, one, you can control how you react to it. You can control how you respond to their, I just love the fact that they responded. Sometimes, you're just in a vacuum. It's like, all your emails go into the ether, and it's like,
right.
Are they even getting it? I love that they responded, but she kept creatively thinking about how to get back in touch with the relationship. And
Yeah,
the creativity of saying, "Can I freelance?" Like that's really cool to give them, some scenarios of how might be able to still be of help.
right. But it was, as you said, Nihar, it was all about the relationship.
Hmm.
She was thinking about, um, what it would be like if she was working there and how she could build a relationship with these people.
Yeah.
So when she reached out to them, even though she was feeling anxious, she did not lead with her anxiety. It was always about putting them first.
Yes.
And I think that's why they responded. I remember one where she wrote to them and she said, it's a rainy Friday morning here, and I'm just wondering how you're doing.
Mm.
And that was it. There was no expectation
Yeah.
that, she wanted them to give her an update on whether they were going to fill the job or not fill the job. I was just thinking of you. And actually, I think at that point, she sent them an article that was related to marketing because
Mhm.
the role, I should have said this, but the role that she ultimately got is a marketing role. So she
Mhm.
found an article on marketing that she thought would be useful to them. And that's what she sent along in her email. She
Yes.
was adding value, thought this would be interesting to you, because it would relate it to a conversation that we had had earlier on.
Mhm. No, I love that example.
Yeah.
Susan, before I forget, I want to, and I hope you have a few minutes here. I know we're going a little bit over. Are you still good?
Yes, I'm still good.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I'm looking at if there's any questions. One thing I want everybody who's on the line to know, Susan, you have a newsletter on LinkedIn,
I do.
right? That you just started.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that newsletter and how can people access it?
Yes. So I have a new newsletter. It's called Get Hired Now. And in this newsletter, I focus on issues that are relative to what's happening in today's job market. So if you go to Get Hired Now with Susan Peppercorn, you can find it. You can subscribe to it. I'd love for you to do that. And I also love any comments. So I'm really trying to engage my readers, and I'd love to hear from my readers and in what's important to them and what they want to hear about. So thank you for asking.
Absolutely. Yeah, I highly recommend if you haven't followed Susan already, please feel free to follow her on LinkedIn. Get subscribed to that newsletter. She also look out for her writing. She has amazing writing out there. I actually was privileged to be someone that you wrote about in one of your Harvard Business
Yeah.
Review articles because I went through the idea of failing and not knowing what was going to happen to me in business school. So one of the things that I love about Susan's work is that she really talks about the importance of being vulnerable and also being open to the learning that comes from that. And I think we're all going through, even if we don't know what somebody else is going through, chances are they're going through something that is equally challenging, and we all can learn from each other as long as we're open to sharing it. So I wanted to just check if there's anything here. One thing I'll just say, people have been commenting here, Susan. They love this interview. My friend Celeste actually said we learn more from hardship, and that's a great point as well.
So true.
I just want to, I guess, close out, Susan, by asking you, when you think about the idea that the most difficult challenge for somebody right now who is out of work for whatever reason, their company might be going, cutting down on their resources, or they are just in a situation where they, I mean, I've had a client that literally was, performance managed out.
Yeah.
And so what advice, or even just some words of wisdom, if we end here, could you have for somebody like that who's just really sitting at home thinking, gosh, what is my future going to look like right now?
I think the thing that I would suggest more than anything else is don't blame yourself.
Mm.
That's number one. And talk to everyone that you possibly can think of and let them know what you do and what you can do. And don't be ashamed and don't be embarrassed, because so many people are going through this. There is no shame and no embarrassment about being out of work. So get the word out, and don't be your own critic,
Mm-hmm.
because there is no shame. You never know who's going to know about a job. So that's what I would recommend.
Excellent, Susan. Thank you so much for that advice and amazing source of hope for people. Please feel free to follow Susan, follow me as well on LinkedIn. And hey, by the way, also pick up her book, Get Your Inner Critic at Work, because chances are you're probably going to relate to some of the things that are in that book. So, Susan, thank you so much for being with us. Really
Thank
appreciate
you.
your time, and hoping you'll have a great rest of your day.
Thanks so much. My pleasure being here.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.